a humble janitor, overlooked and humiliated by the city's elite during a lavish New Year's Eve party. But when the lights flicker and the doors lock, they realize too late that the invisible man isn't who they thought he was. Marcos stood in the grand hall of the sprawling mansion, the faint scent of polished marble and fresh-cut flowers filling the air. He moved with quiet efficiency, his hands gripping the mop handle as he worked his way across the gleaming floor. His uniform, plain and slightly oversized, made him blend into the background, a shadow in a room flooded with brilliance. Outside the towering glass windows, the city's elite began to arrive. Sleek black cars pulled up to the curved driveway, and immaculately dressed guests stepped out, their laughter and chatter spilling into the cold night. They were adorned in silks and sequins, their smiles painted with the ease of privilege. Inside, the atmosphere buzzed with superficial conversations and clinking champagne glasses. Marcos observed everything from the periphery, his movements practiced and unassuming. His dark eyes lingered on the opulent chandelier above, the way it refracted light like shattered diamonds. He had seen such extravagance before, though it always struck him as alien, something designed to impress, yet hollow in its excess. As he worked, the sound of voices grew louder. A group of young men entered, their confidence filling the room like an overpowering perfume. Tomas led the pack, his tailored suit and slick-back hair radiating an air of entitlement. Behind him were Lucas, Andre, and Bruno, all equally polished, their laughter sharp and cutting. "Who's that?" Lucas asked, gesturing vaguely toward Marcos. Tomas smirked. "Nobody, just the help." The comment drew laughter from the group, the kind that came from knowing everyone around them shared the same disdain. Marcos didn't react, his head bowed as he pushed the mop across the floor, but his ears caught every word, his grip tightening briefly on the handle before releasing. Tomas and his friends made their way to the bar, their presence commanding attention. They were the center of the evening, the embodiment of wealth and power. Yet to them, Marcos was invisible. He was part of the scenery, no more significant than the furniture or the ornate decorations that adorned the room. As the night wore on, the party swelled. The laughter grew louder, the music more vibrant. Marcos worked steadily, weaving through the crowd with practiced precision, avoiding eye contact and staying in the shadows. But his gaze remained sharp, taking in the details. The way Tomas gestured extravagantly as he spoke, the way his friends leaned in to laugh at his jokes, the way their arrogance filled the room like a suffocating fog. Marcos's mind drifted to memories he rarely allowed himself to revisit. There had been a time when he stood taller, spoke louder, commanded attention, but that was a lifetime ago. Now he moved in silence, his presence unnoticed, his existence unacknowledged. "Hey, watch it!" Bruno's voice snapped Marcos back to the present as the young man brushed past him, spilling a few drops of his drink onto the polished floor. Bruno didn't wait for a response. His back already turned as Marcos bent to clean the spill. For a brief moment, Marcos paused. His reflection stared back at him from the wet surface of the floor, a face lined with years of hardship, eyes that carried stories untold. He wiped the floor clean and straightened, the faintest hint of a shadow crossing his face. The night pressed on, the party reaching its crescendo. Marcos returned to his corner, blending into the walls once more. But his eyes never stopped moving, watching, waiting. To everyone else, he was invisible. But Marcos saw everything. The party reached its peak as laughter and music echoed through the mansion's grand halls. The chandelier above shimmered like a cascade of frozen stars, casting its glow over a sea of expensive suits and dazzling gowns. Marcos moved silently through the crowd, the clinking of glasses and chatter blending into a distant hum. He had learned long ago how to be invisible, even in a room filled with people. But tonight, invisibility wasn't enough. Tomas, already on his third cocktail, leaned against the bar with a lazy grin. His friends surrounded him, their polished appearances barely masking the sharp edges of their arrogance. Marcos passed by, his mop and bucket in tow, drawing Tomas's gaze. "Hey you," Tomas called out, his voice cutting through the noise. The room barely noticed, but Marcos stopped, turning slowly toward the group. "Don't ignore me, man," Tomas continued, smirking. "Can't you see we've got a mess here?" He gestured broadly at the spotless floor and his friends laughed. Marcos said nothing. His expression was calm, his hands steady as they gripped the mop. Tomas's grin widened as he sensed an audience forming around them. "Come on, show us what you're good at," Tomas added, his tone dripping with mockery. "Clean up our mess." Bruno, eager to join in, grabbed a glass of champagne and flung its contents toward Marcos. The liquid splashed across his uniform, soaking the fabric. The crowd erupted in laughter, their amusement fueled by alcohol and indifference. Marcos stood still, his face an unreadable mask. "Oops," Bruno said with mock innocence. "Guess you'll need to clean yourself up too." Lucas and Andre clapped in approval, their laughter echoing louder than the music. Marcos calmly set the mop down and began to wipe the champagne from his uniform with a towel he carried. His movements were deliberate, almost mechanical, as if he were detached from the scene unfolding around him. "Man, look at him," Andre said, shaking his head. "Doesn't even talk, like a robot." Tomas stepped closer, his voice dropping to a mockingly sympathetic tone. "What's wrong? Too shy to join the party?" He placed a hand on Marcos's shoulder, leaning in as if sharing a secret. "Or maybe you just like being invisible." The laughter around them grew, the sound pressing in like a weight. Marcos's grip on the towel tightened for a moment, but his expression didn't waver. He met Tomas's gaze for the briefest of moments, a flicker of something dark and unreadable in his eyes. "Come on, man, say something," Bruno chimed in, his voice rising in volume. He gave Marcos a light shove, enough to make the onlookers cheer. Marcos stepped back, his movements controlled. The air around him seemed to shift, the weight of his silence becoming almost tangible. He looked at Tomas and his friends, his gaze steady, his lips pressed into a thin line. For a moment the noise seemed to dull, the laughter fading into the background, but then Tomas raised his glass in a mocking toast. "To our hard-working friend here, the true hero of the night." The crowd raised their glasses, their cheers a hollow echo of Tomas's cruelty. Marcos didn't react. He picked up his mop and bucket, turned, and walked away without a word. The sound of his footsteps faded into the distance as he disappeared into the staff area. The group's laughter resumed, the moment forgotten as quickly as it had begun. But somewhere in the dimly lit corridors of the mansion, Marcos paused. His back against the wall, his eyes closed briefly, he exhaled a slow, measured breath. The silence in his gaze earlier had deepened, shifting into something darker, colder. The game had begun, though Tomas and his friends had yet to realize it. The festivities roared on as the mansion buzzed with energy, a kaleidoscope of laughter, music, and champagne. The night was alive with indulgence, the kind that money could buy and arrogance could sustain. Marcos remained unseen, his presence dissolving into the shadows of the servants' quarters. But beneath the surface, something had shifted, an almost imperceptible tension brewing in the quiet corners of the grand estate. Back in the main hall, Tomas stood atop a small staircase, his glass raised high. His voice carried over the din, drawing the attention of the room. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his words slightly slurred but no less commanding. "In honor of the new year, I have a little idea." The crowd turned toward him, their faces alight with curiosity. Behind Tomas, Lucas, Andre, and Bruno smirked, already sensing the mischief their leader was about to unleash. Tomas gestured grandly toward the tall, ornate doors that led out of the mansion. "No one is leaving tonight until the clock strikes 12. Consider it a little tradition." Laughter rippled through the room, the guests indulging his eccentric declaration. Tomas waved toward one of the security staff, a man in a crisp suit standing near the entrance. The man hesitated briefly before nodding and moving to lock the doors, the sound of the heavy bolt sliding into place echoing ominously in the room. "Now we're all in this together," Tomas proclaimed, drawing cheers from the crowd. The room erupted in applause, the guests taking it as a harmless, whimsical gesture. But behind the scenes, Marcos watched. From the service area, he stood by a narrow window, his eyes fixed on the locked doors. The weight of the decision hung heavily in the air, though no one seemed to notice. His hands, calloused from years of work, rested on the edge of the countertop, his fingers tapping rhythmically against the wood. A flicker of a memory surfaced, a distant, fragmented image of a different time. Boots on gravel, the hum of a helicopter in the distance, the heat of a desert sun. The words barked in sharp, commanding tones. His chest rose and fell as the ghost of that life pressed against the edges of his mind. Marcos turned away from the window, his steps deliberate as he moved toward the utility room. He opened a drawer and pulled out a flashlight, testing its beam before pocketing it. His gaze swept over the room, settling briefly on a row of cleaning supplies. The faintest hint of a smile ghosted his lips before he closed the drawer and walked out. The main hall was alive with revelry as the guests danced and drank, oblivious to the growing tension in the air. In the corner of the room, Lucas nudged Andre and pointed toward the entrance to the staff area. "Think he's still hiding back there?" Lucas asked, his tone mocking. "Probably sulking," Andre replied with a smirk. "Let him. Not like he's going anywhere." Unbeknownst to them, Marcos was no longer in the staff area. He had moved through the mansion with practiced ease, his steps soundless, his eyes scanning every hallway and corner. He knew this place well, better than its owners, better than the guests who wandered through its luxurious rooms. The mansion's grandeur hid its vulnerabilities, but Marcos had memorized them all. The creaky door hinges, the blind spots in the security cameras, the narrow staircases that led to forgotten corners. He didn't need a map. He carried the layout in his mind, a silent strategy forming with every step. In the heart of the house, Tomas raised another glass, oblivious to the shift in atmosphere. The music faltered briefly, a flicker of static running through the speakers before they resumed. No one seemed to notice. No one except Marcos. From the shadows, he watched. The game had changed, and the players hadn't yet realized they were no longer in control. The laughter in the grand hall began to wane as the first flicker of unease swept through the crowd. The lights above the ornate chandelier dimmed unexpectedly, causing a ripple of murmurs among the guests. A moment later, they flared back to life, but the temporary darkness had left an impression, a faint shadow of discomfort that lingered in the air. "Just a glitch," Tomas said loudly, waving his hand dismissively. "Don't let it ruin the party." His words were met with forced chuckles, but a sense of tension settled like an invisible weight on the room. Marcos moved silently through the servant corridors, his steps measured, his breathing calm. He reached the main electrical panel tucked away in the basement. With the flick of a switch, another section of the mansion plunged into darkness. Above him, he could hear the faint echo of voices rising in confusion. Back in the hall, Tomas frowned, craning his neck to peer toward the far end of the room, where the lights had gone out completely. Guests murmured in uneasy tones, their shadows stretching unnaturally in the dim, flickering light. "Someone should check that out," Andre said, his voice tinged with nervous laughter. "You're joking, right?" Bruno replied. "I'm not wandering around this place in the dark." Lucas crossed his arms, trying to project an air of confidence. "Relax, it's probably just some old wiring. These places always have issues." Marcos, however, knew better. The wiring was fine. He had made sure of that during his routine cleaning rounds. Every flicker, every blackout, it was by design. His design. The mansion, once a haven of luxury and indulgence, began to feel like a trap. Doors that had been open earlier were now locked. Hallways that seemed familiar now felt foreign, their shadows stretching endlessly into darkness. The occasional creak of floorboards or faint sound of something moving in the distance kept everyone on edge. "What the hell is going on?" Tomas muttered under his breath. He tried to maintain his composure, but a bead of sweat glistened on his temple. "Maybe it's just the staff messing up," Lucas suggested, though his voice lacked conviction. "Where's that janitor guy?" Bruno asked. "Maybe he's—" A loud thud interrupted him, reverberating through the room like a warning. The guests froze, their conversations halting mid-sentence. Someone whispered nervously, "What was that?" Tomas forced a laugh. "Probably just something falling over, nothing to worry about." But worry had already taken root. The mansion's once vibrant atmosphere was now suffocating, its grandeur overshadowed by a creeping sense of vulnerability. Even the most confident guests began glancing over their shoulders, their champagne glasses held with trembling hands. Marcos watched from the shadows, his face an impassive mask. He had spent hours studying the guests, memorizing their movements, their dynamics. They were prey now, though they didn't know it yet. The faint light from his flashlight illuminated his path as he moved silently through hidden corridors, closing doors and creating barriers. In the main hall, the group of young men huddled together, their bravado eroding with each passing minute. "Maybe we should split up and look around," Andre suggested hesitantly. "Are you insane?" Lucas snapped. "This isn't a movie. We stick together." "You're acting like something's actually wrong," Tomas said, though his voice betrayed him. His eyes darted toward the nearest darkened hallway, his jaw tightening. "There's nothing here." Another sound, a faint, deliberate scrape, cut through the air. It came from the direction of the locked kitchen doors. Everyone turned, their expressions a mix of fear and uncertainty. What if someone's doing this on purpose? Bruno whispered. Tomas shook his head, forcing a smirk. Like who? The janitor? He laughed, but it was hollow, a thin veneer of confidence cracking under the weight of the unknown. Marco stood just beyond the locked kitchen door, listening to the muffled voices. His hands rested lightly on the cool surface, his breathing steady. He closed his eyes for a moment, recalling the countless missions he had carried out in silence, the art of becoming a ghost in his own skin. Inside the hall, the fear was palpable. The once vibrant party had devolved into hushed whispers and darting glances. Marcos allowed himself the faintest hint of satisfaction. The hunt had begun. The mansion had transformed from a lavish retreat into a labyrinth of unease. The corridors, once inviting with their warm golden light, now seemed endless and foreboding. Each flickering shadow carried the weight of something unseen, something waiting. The guests, stripped of their earlier arrogance, moved cautiously, their laughter replaced by hushed whispers. Tomas and his friends huddled near the main staircase, their confidence eroding by the minute. Bruno glanced over his shoulder repeatedly, his nerves unraveling. Okay, this isn't funny anymore. Where's security? Relax, Tomas snapped, though his own voice wavered. We'll find the janitor and get this sorted out. You think he's behind this? Andre asked, his face pale. Tomas hesitated. Who else would it be? He's been skulking around all night. Meanwhile, Marcos moved through the mansion like a shadow, his steps silent and deliberate. He had no weapon. He didn't need one. The house was his ally, and his training had taught him that fear was a tool sharper than any blade. He slipped into a small, forgotten storage room, where an old circuit breaker hummed faintly. He flipped another switch, plunging the east wing into total darkness. The muffled sound of startled gasps reached his ears. A faint smile tugged at the corner of his lips. They were beginning to feel it, the helplessness, the vulnerability. He moved on. In the hall, the group of young men began to unravel further. Lucas cursed under his breath, gripping the back of a chair to steady himself. I'm not staying here. We need to find a way out. The doors are locked, genius, Bruno shot back, his voice rising. What do you suggest? Climbing out a window? Before anyone could respond, a loud, deliberate bang echoed through the mansion. It wasn't random. It was measured, calculated. The group froze, their breaths caught in their throats. Did you hear that? Andre whispered, his eyes darting toward the darkened corridor. Yeah, Lucas muttered, and it's coming closer. Marcos moved like a predator through the house, using the echoes and acoustics to his advantage. He had observed their every move earlier in the night, the way they carried themselves, the subtle cracks in their camaraderie. They were strong in numbers, but weak when isolated. He would use that. The first to break was Bruno. Unable to bear the suffocating tension, he bolted down the hallway, his footsteps loud and uneven. Screw this! I'm getting out of here! Bruno! Wait! Tomas called after him, but the words fell on deaf ears. Bruno's sprint came to an abrupt halt when he reached a locked door. He tugged at the handle frantically, his breath coming in short, panicked bursts. Behind him, the faint sound of footsteps reached his ears, measured, deliberate. He turned, pressing his back to the door as his eyes darted wildly in the dim light. Who's there? He shouted, his voice cracking. I'm warning you! The footsteps stopped and silence enveloped the hallway. It stretched on for what felt like an eternity, the absence of sound more terrifying than any noise. Bruno's hands trembled as he gripped the edge of the doorframe, his heart pounding in his chest. Then a faint beam of light cut through the darkness, a flashlight, sweeping slowly across the floor. It moved closer, illuminating nothing but the empty corridor. Yet the sense of presence was overwhelming, suffocating. Bruno backed away, his knees threatening to buckle. From the shadows, Marcos watched, his flashlight aimed low to obscure his own position. He waited until Bruno turned his back to the corridor before stepping into the edge of the light. He didn't need to make a sound. The faint glimpse of his silhouette was enough. Bruno screamed. The sound reverberated through the mansion, sending chills through the remaining guests. Tomas, Lucas, and Andre looked at one another, their fear now fully formed. We need to stick together, Tomas said, his voice firm but laced with urgency. Whatever's going on, we're not splitting up. But it was too late. Bruno's scream had shattered the fragile bond holding them together. Marcos knew this. He had spent his life understanding fear, mastering it, and now he wielded it with precision. In the silence that followed, Marcos disappeared into the shadows once more. The hunt continued. Tomas's heart pounded in his chest as the group stumbled into the mansion's library, a cavernous room lined with towering bookshelves and adorned with thick velvet curtains. The heavy doors creaked shut behind them, muffling the distant sounds of Bruno's scream, which still echoed in their minds. Lucas fumbled for the light switch, but nothing happened. "Of course the lights are out here too," he muttered, his voice trembling. "This is insane," Andre whispered. "This isn't just some random power outage. Someone's doing this." Tomas forced a steadying breath and turned to the others. "We need to keep calm. We stick together and figure this out." "Figure what out?" Lucas snapped. "We're trapped in here with some psychopath." Before Tomas could respond, Andre's gaze fell on the mahogany desk in the center of the room. The surface was cluttered with papers, books, and what looked like an old, yellowed newspaper clipping. He stepped closer, his curiosity overcoming his fear. "What's that?" Lucas asked, peering over Andre's shoulder. Andre picked up the clipping, his brow furrowing as he scanned the bolded headline. "Elite Forces Soldier, declared missing in action." The article included a grainy black and white photo of a younger man in uniform, his expression stoic, his posture rigid. The name below the image read, Marcos Albuquerque. "That's him," Andre whispered, his voice barely audible. "Who?" Tomas asked, stepping closer. "The janitor," Andre said, holding up the clipping. "This is him. Look at the eyes. It's the same guy." Tomas snatched the paper from Andre, reading it quickly. The details were sparse but chilling. Marcos had been a member of an elite special forces unit, trained in guerrilla warfare, survival, and psychological operations. He was presumed dead during a classified mission overseas. "Missing in action," Tomas murmured. "But he's not dead." Lucas paced nervously, running his hands through his hair. "This can't be real. He's just some janitor. How could someone like that end up here?" Andre's voice trembled as he replied, "If this is true, he's not just someone. He's trained to do things we can't even imagine." Tomas set the clipping down, his mind racing. He recalled the way Marcos had moved through the party earlier in the evening, silent, deliberate, his eyes constantly observing. Every detail now seemed laden with meaning, every glance carrying a weight they hadn't noticed before. "He's been planning this," Tomas said, his voice low. "Every move we've made, he's been watching us." "What does he want?" Lucas asked, his tone almost pleading. "Why is he doing this?" Tomas shook his head. "I don't know. Maybe he's just crazy." But the unease in his voice betrayed him. Deep down, he knew this wasn't random. Marcos's actions weren't the work of a madman. They were calculated, precise, a methodical dismantling of the power they once thought unshakable. A loud crash echoed from somewhere beyond the library doors, followed by a series of faint, deliberate footsteps. The group froze, their eyes locked on the doors as the sound grew closer. Lucas grabbed a heavy book from the nearest shelf, clutching it like a weapon. "Do you think he knows we're in here?" Andre whispered, his voice barely audible. Tomas didn't answer. Instead, he moved to the desk and began rifling through the drawers. His fingers trembled as he searched for anything that might give them an edge. Keys, tools, a phone, but found nothing useful. "We can't just stay here," Lucas said, his voice rising in panic. "He's toying with us." Tomas grabbed his arm, forcing him to look him in the eyes. "We stick together, understand? If we panic, we're done." The footsteps stopped abruptly, leaving an oppressive silence in their wake. The group held their breath, their ears straining to detect even the faintest sound. But there was nothing, only the heavy stillness of the library. And then, faintly, a single knock echoed against the door. Marcos stood just outside, his head tilted slightly as he listened. The game was nearing its climax, and he knew the fear inside the room was palpable. He didn't need to break the door down. Their terror was already doing the work for him. Inside, Tomas clenched his fists, his mind racing. He glanced at the newspaper clipping again, the photo of the man who had been declared missing so many years ago. The soldier was not gone. He was here, and he had become their reckoning. Inside the darkened library, the knock echoed like a thunderclap, shattering the fragile thread of control holding the group together. Andre backed away from the door, his hands shaking. "He's right there," he whispered. "He's waiting for us." "Shut up," Tomas hissed, his voice low but forceful. "You're going to get us all killed." Lucas paced near the bookshelves, his breathing uneven. We can't just sit here and wait for him to come in. We need to make a move. And do what? Bruno snapped. His face was pale, his bravado from earlier in the evening completely gone. Run out there and hope he doesn't catch us? That's suicide. The silence outside the door was suffocating. No more knocks came, no footsteps retreated. It was as if Marcos was daring them to act. The tension pushed each of them closer to their breaking point. Lucas stopped pacing and pointed at Andre. Why don't you go? You're the one who found the damn newspaper. Maybe you can distract him while we figure out a way out of here. Are you insane? Andre shot back. You go if you're so eager. The argument escalated, their voices rising in panic and anger. Tomas tried to interject, but his authority over the group was slipping. In the corner, Bruno made a quiet decision. Without warning, he bolted for the door, yanking it open and sprinting into the hallway. Bruno, no! Tomas yelled, but it was too late. The others froze, straining to hear what would happen next. A loud thud echoed down the corridor, followed by a muffled cry, then silence. Tomas turned back to the group, his face grim. He's picking us off, one by one. The grand hall was eerily quiet, its once glamorous ambience now a shadowy battleground. The faint echoes of Bruno's last cry still lingered in the air, sending chills through Tomas, Lucas, and Andre as they crept cautiously down a dimly lit corridor. Fear had stripped away their confidence, leaving only desperation in its place. We have to end this, Tomas said, his voice low but resolute. We need to face him. Face him? Andre whispered harshly. Are you insane? He's a trained killer. We're no match for him. Lucas clenched his jaw, his hands trembling. He's playing with us. Every step we take, he's already planned it. How do we beat someone like that? Tomas stopped abruptly, his gaze sweeping over their surroundings. His eyes settled on the mansion's grand dining room just ahead, its long table still set with untouched plates and sparkling silverware. We use the only thing we have left, his ego. What are you talking about? Lucas asked, confusion laced with frustration. He's toying with us because he wants us to suffer, Tomas said, his mind racing. He doesn't just want to kill us, he wants to break us. If we confront him head-on, we might catch him off guard. Andre scoffed. That's your plan? Suicide by Janitor? Tomas didn't respond. Instead, he pushed open the heavy double doors to the dining room and stepped inside. The others hesitated before following, the room's stillness pressing in around them like a physical force. Marcos, Tomas shouted, his voice echoing through the mansion. We know who you are. We know what you've done. Come out and face us. For a moment, there was only silence. Then, from the shadows at the far end of the room, Marcos emerged. His expression was unreadable, his movements calm and deliberate. The faint beam of his flashlight danced across the walls, casting ghostly shapes that seemed to move with him. Tomas took a step forward, his fist clenched. This ends now. Marcos stopped a few paces away, tilting his head slightly as if considering Tomas's words. Then, in a low, steady voice, he spoke for the first time that night. No, Tomas, he said, his tone cold and calculated. This is just the beginning. The air grew thick with tension as Marcos extinguished his flashlight, plunging the room into near-total darkness. The final game had begun, and the rules were his alone. Darkness enveloped the dining room, broken only by the faint moonlight filtering through the high-arched windows. Tomas, Lucas, and Andre stood frozen, their breathing shallow as they strained to see through the shadows. Marcos's presence was a suffocating weight, even unseen. The silence was worse than any sound, thick, heavy, and relentless. Where is he? Andre whispered, his voice trembling. Quiet, Tomas snapped, his own nerves fraying. He tightened his grip on the ornate candlestick he had picked up from the table, his makeshift weapon feeling woefully inadequate. A faint sound, a deliberate step, echoed from the far side of the room. All three turned toward the noise, their eyes wide. Marcos moved with precision, using the room's vastness to his advantage. He wasn't rushing. He didn't need to. The fear he had sown had already taken root. Come out, coward, Tomas yelled, his voice breaking. You think you're some kind of hero? You're nothing but a glorified janitor. A low, humorless chuckle emerged from the shadows, sending chills down their spines. Marcos's voice followed, calm and deliberate. And you think your money protects you, that it makes you untouchable. Tonight, you've learned otherwise. Stop this, Lucas shouted, panic overtaking him. We're sorry, okay? We shouldn't have treated you like that. Just let us go. Marcos stepped into the faint light, his face cold and unyielding. Sorry? He shook his head slowly. Sorry isn't enough. Not for people like you. You think your apology erases the way you belittle those beneath you? Tonight you face what you truly are, cowards. With lightning speed, Marcos lunged at Lucas, disarming him of the heavy chair he had been holding and sending him sprawling to the floor. Andre turned to run, but Marcos anticipated the move, blocking his path with a swift, calculated motion. Tomas stood his ground, his jaw clenched, his candlestick raised. You don't scare me. Marcos smirked faintly. Then you're even more of a fool than I thought. He closed the distance between them in an instant, his movements fluid and deliberate. With a single, precise twist, he disarmed Tomas, leaving him defenseless. The three young men were now huddled together, defeated and trembling. Marcos stared down at them, his expression unreadable. As the clock struck midnight, fireworks erupted outside, their vibrant explosions mocking the hollow silence within the mansion. Marcos spoke one final time, his voice cutting through the noise. You wanted to play games, now you've lost. The fireworks outside lit up the night sky in bursts of vibrant colors, their echoes reverberating through the mansion's thick walls. Inside, the grand dining room remained cloaked in darkness, its oppressive silence contrasting sharply with the celebrations outside. Tomas, Lucas, and Andre knelt on the cold marble floor, their once pristine suits disheveled, their faces pale with fear. Marcos stood before them, his figure outlined faintly by the flashes of light seeping through the windows. His expression was calm, almost indifferent, as he regarded the trio with an intensity that made them avert their eyes. He held no weapon, but the weight of his presence alone was enough to render them powerless. You thought this night was yours, Marcos began, his voice low and steady. A celebration of your privilege, your arrogance. You paraded your wealth and mocked those beneath you because you believed nothing could touch you. Tomas glared up at him, his defiance a faint flicker of the bravado he'd wielded earlier. You can't do this. People will come looking for us. Marcos's lips curved into a faint smile. And what will they find? The spoiled children of the city's elite, cowering in their own shadows? What story will you tell them? The words hung heavy in the air. Lucas whimpered, clutching his knees as tears streaked his face. Please, we'll do anything. Just let us go. We're sorry. Stop, Marcos interrupted sharply. The single word silenced Lucas instantly. Marcos took a step closer, his boots echoing softly against the floor. Do you think I want your apologies? Words mean nothing to men like you. Your lives have been handed to you on silver platters, and you've done nothing with them but ruin others. He crouched slightly, his dark eyes meeting Tomas's directly. Tonight, I am not your punishment. I am your reflection. Tomas tried to hold his gaze but faltered, looking away as his composure crumbled. Marcos stood again, his imposing figure casting a long shadow over the three men. He walked to the long dining table, where a bottle of champagne sat untouched. Picking it up, he poured himself a glass, his movements deliberate and unnervingly calm. The guests outside are celebrating a new year, he said, raising the glass slightly. For them, it's a clean slate, a chance to start over. But for you, tonight will mark the end of who you pretended to be. What are you going to do to us? Andre asked, his voice trembling. Marcos set the glass down without drinking. Nothing more than what you've already done to yourselves. From his pocket, he retrieved a small folded note and placed it on the table. Without another word, he turned and walked toward the doors, his footsteps echoing in the vast room. The three men didn't move, paralyzed by fear and uncertainty, until the sound of the doors closing behind him snapped them out of their trance. Tomas scrambled to his feet, rushing to the table and snatching the note. His hands shook as he unfolded it, revealing a single handwritten line. Cuidado com quem você humilha. The words hit him like a blow, their weight far greater than the sum of their letters. What does it mean? Lucas asked weakly, still kneeling on the floor. Tomas didn't answer. He crushed the note in his fist, his jaw tightening as he realized the truth. Marcos didn't need to hurt them. He'd already destroyed the foundations of their arrogance, leaving them exposed and broken. The sound of the front doors unlocking echoed faintly through the mansion. The trio exchanged glances before stumbling toward the exit, their fear driving them forward. They emerged into the cold night, disheveled and humiliated, under the curious stares of the remaining guests who had gathered outside. Whispers and gasps rippled through the crowd as Tomas, Lucas, and Andres' once pristine images crumbled before their very eyes. Marcos watched from the shadows, standing at the edge of the property. His job was done. Without fanfare, he turned and disappeared into the night, his silhouette blending seamlessly with the darkness. As the clock struck its final note for the first minute of the new year, the mansion stood as a silent witness to the night's events. Marcos left behind no trace, but the lesson etched into the hearts of those who had underestimated him. For the guests and for Tomas's group, the words on that note would echo long after the fireworks faded. Beware whom you humiliate. In the end, the story reminds us of a powerful truth. How we treat those we consider invisible speaks volumes about who we truly are. Marcos's silent warning challenges us to reflect on our own actions. Would we have shown kindness, or would we have underestimated him like they did? It's a chilling reminder that no one is ever truly powerless, and arrogance can blind us to the strength of others. Click on the video on your screen to continue this journey of self-discovery and explore more stories that challenge the way we see the world. Don't forget to subscribe for more thought-provoking content, and let's keep asking the important questions about ourselves and the choices we make. See you in the next video.